I'm Sean White, and today we're meditating on comfort foods. We have officially reached autumn, and with that, the temperatures are starting to dip a little bit more, so we start getting some changes in our lives, in our perspectives, right? Going from tank tops to flannel shirts or nice, comfortable sweaters. For some reason, everything has to be pumpkin flavored now. I don't know why. But also, as the temperature starts to drop and we get into the fall season, we start craving comfort foods a little bit more than we normally do, right? I would say that there's some comfort foods that we like to do year round, but in the colder weather, they're just something that speaks to us a little bit more, whether it be meatloaf or mac and cheese, spaghetti and meatballs. Good stuff. Cheese fries. I love me some good cheese fries. Donuts, cookies, ice cream, chocolate cake, chili, hearty soups, all like these things that we just kind of want and crave a little bit more when we start running into this time of year. And there's reasons for this, right? And we're gonna discuss those reasons, and we're gonna discuss some of the problems that can come from them. So let's just jump right in and start talking about comfort foods. So there's three different reasons why, or three different main reasons why I'm going to say that we crave comfort foods, right? Periodically throughout the year, you might just have like an urge for something, and you satiate it and you move on and you go back to your normal diet and whatnot. But when the weather gets cooler, we start looking for a couple more foods. Now, one of the main reasons why we would crave comfort foods anyway, this is any time of the year, is because we're trying to relieve a negative mental state, right? I'm going to call this emotional eating. So if we have a lot of stress and anxiety going on, if we're suffering through depression, if we have loneliness, if we're unhappy with where we are in our lives, either physically, mentally, financially, we're just feeling nostalgic, right? We want these foods that kind of give us a mood boost, right? And that's what these foods do. They're usually high in carbs, high in fats. They make us feel good. They give us a sense of well-being, at least initially. And then there's other things. I mentioned nostalgia. There might be foods that you associate with a happier time or place in your life. I enjoy some of my favorite comfort foods are French dishes that I associate from my time like in Paris, having dinner with friends and whatnot. And so this becomes the emotional eating aspect. We are trying to make ourselves feel better, and we're using food as our coping mechanism. And why do we do this? Well, these foods, they help create a couple chemicals in the brain, dopamine and serotonin. These are known as your happy chemicals. And we eat these foods and they give us a lift and we feel better, usually temporarily. I know for myself, a lot of times I overdo it and then I feel terrible afterwards. But more on that later. But that's what we're doing with these foods. That's what we're doing with these comfort foods. It's like, thinking about like a nice big bowl of mac and cheese. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. And that's why we're eating them, is because we don't feel warm and fuzzy inside to begin with. So we're compensating for that. Now, the interesting thing, and now we're going to get a little scientific on why this might happen more in the fall season. We mentioned dopamine and serotonin. Now, these two chemicals are also produced when we exercise and when we have exposure to sunlight. Now, in spring and summer, we tend to be a little bit more active. We get out, might be playing like more sports, might be going to the beach, might be riding our bikes, going on vacations and walking around amusement parks and all like this stuff. And so when I mention exercise, I also really talk about being active, right? I don't necessarily talk about like being in a gym, But if you're more active and you're out, this is a form of exercise. And if you're outside, now you're in the sun. So you're getting that exposure to sunlight. So now your body is producing the dopamine and the serotonin. Well, fall rolls around and everything gets a little cooler and you decide you don't want to be outside anymore. You'd rather be on your couch underneath a blanket, watching a little Netflix and chilling and having a bowl of potato chips in front of you. Now, what happens with that is there's less dopamine and less serotonin production happening in your body regularly. So now we're compensating for that by eating these foods that help, boost our mood and produce those things. So this is something that we're doing, and we may not even realize that this is the reason why we're doing it, right? It's just we're a little bit happier in the summertime because we're more active and we're in the sun more. Couple that with the fact that, once we get into daylight savings time and there's less daylight, now we're talking about seasonal affective disorder, all that stuff. Now we're going down a whole rabbit hole. So that's another reason why we might be craving the comfort foods around this time of year. Now, the last one that I'm going to mention is more evolutionary, right? It's not really something that applies to us today, but might be something that's been passed down generation to generation to generation and not even realize it, right? If you think about winter coming, think about bears. Bears go into hibernation. So what do they do at this time of year? They eat a lot of things and they put on extra weight. So then this way they have insulation against the cold, and they have reserves, energy reserves that they can rely on while they're in hibernation. Now, we're not a species that hibernates, but if you think about growing cycles in different parts of the world, different parts of the hemisphere, cooler temperatures tend to mean that your crops are winding down. Food scarcity becomes more of an issue in the winter months. The further north you go, probably the stronger it becomes. So we may be craving these comfort foods with their high fats and high carbohydrates and high sugars that are going to put on a little bit more weight on us because we're trying to put on a little extra weight as insulation for the cooler months, and because of the fact that food scarcity might be an issue, and so we're giving ourselves a little extra reserves for those leaner months. Now, the reality is we're probably living in houses with heat, and we probably have a supermarket really close by so we can go get more food anytime we want it. So it's not really an issue, but this is one of those things that are just kind of ingrained in us that we don't even think about. So these are a couple of the reasons why we might be craving comfort foods. Now let's talk about the reason why they might be problematic. All right, so are comfort foods a problem? Well, depends, right? How often are you eating them? How much are you eating of them? Is this just a once in a while type thing, or are you doing this all the time? If you're just having it once in a while, it's not that big of a deal, and it might not even be a craving. It might just be an urge to have something. So we got to look at it from that perspective, because the reality is most of these foods that I've been talking about, like I said, high in fats, high in carbohydrates, high in salts, high in sugars. All these things are not necessarily good for us. If you go back and you watch our videos on carbohydrates and fats, we go into it a lot more in depth there. But it runs into the potential of negative health effects and more weight gain and all things like that. Now, there's times that we could look at maybe finding healthy alternatives or healthy modifications to certain dishes. Sometimes it's just not really an option, but there's certain things, like I've been playing around with a recipe more recently where it's a 3-part chopped mushrooms to 4 parts ground beef for making hamburger patties, right? So now we're kind of getting to a point where we're getting a lot more vegetables inside. We still have that meat. It still tastes like that burger. But this is a healthy modification. Or I know of a really good plant-based nacho cheese sauce to make mac and cheese with. These are things that we can think about, right? We can maybe make healthier choices with it. So the reality is, though, that the effects of these comfort foods anyway are short-lived. They're temporary. It's been shown that even if you didn't eat that comfort food at all, you would end up with the same result. That's because most of the time our emotions are temporary. We've discussed this in the past too, right? They're like clouds going by in the sky. So you feel stressed now and then you eat to relieve that stress. Well, most likely that stress was going to get relieved anyway. But this is also what we're talking about with like healthier alternatives. Like you could probably have done some form of exercise instead to do that. Because the fact of the matter is there's studies that show that you could get the same benefits from other things rather than food, right? Like I said, exercise and exposure to sunlight increases your dopamine and serotonin levels. But watching your favorite movie can do that. Reading your favorite book, having a conversation with friends, having like a really good belly laugh over something. These are all things that can improve upon your mood as well, without the need of these foods that could potentially be unhealthy, if eaten in large quantities. Now, these are things that I want you to think about, but also I want to point out the fact that we are talking about relieving negative emotional states. And if this is something that is chronic, this is something I want you to look at more seriously. Because if you're suffering through depression, or if you have chronic stress and you're constantly using food as a coping mechanism for this, we can start running into issues. Because we're not looking at the underlying root cause of these issues, like the depression, the loneliness, stress, nostalgia, all these things that we talk about. If this is going on all the time and you're constantly using food as a coping mechanism, that's not good, right? If you were using alcohol every time you got stressed out, you would go, yeah, no, that's not good. But if you're using potato chips, same thing, right? It's just still that same kind of behavior of using something to cope, which is more of like putting a Band-Aid on something rather than trying to fix the underlying root problem. So I want you to think about that if you find yourself craving comfort foods all the time because you feel a certain way all the time. Well, trying to figure out how to alleviate that feeling all the time, because that's more of the issue. So that's what I wanted to talk about in regard to comfort foods. They're completely fine in moderation, right? I'm not going to tell you not to eat like a nice big bowl of pasta, because the reality is I'm probably going to do that later. Be hypocritical of me. But just be mindful of the reason why you're craving them. Think about those additional scientific reasons as well. And if you need to make some changes, try to make some changes. And if you don't know how to make changes, then get in touch with me. Give me a call, shoot me an email, and we can talk about it. Or leave some comments down below on this video. Start a dialogue. And if you like this video, click the like button. Let your friends know what we have going on here. And if you want to hear more of what I got to say, then subscribe and turn on notifications and find out when new videos are coming out. So until we speak again, be well, be safe, and be kind to everybody.